exercise freedom of conscience and experience religious liberty for all. For the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the principle of religious freedom has strong biblical, historical, and theological foundations, and there is a long history of advocating and promoting religious liberty around the world. Today, the Church has PARL, Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, which is its church-based arm, and the International Religious Liberty Association, IRLA, which was organized by the Church 131 years ago as an interdenominational organization that works to promote freedom to believe or not, as defined by Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We believe religious freedom is a foundational human right and intimately connected with all other human rights. But to understand fully where we are today, we need to understand where have we come from. So we're going to have this afternoon a quick history lesson, and I promise you it will be quick. Before the formal establishment of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1863, leaders of the Adventist Church, or the soon-to-be leaders of the Adventist Church, were involved in defending the principle of freedom of conscience and religious freedom. There is evidence of individuals being actively involved in the Underground Railway, helping slaves escape from the southern United States. In 1851, one of the leaders, John Nevin Andrews, explored the pivotal role of religious freedom and end-time events. In 1864, just 1 year after the church was formed, the Adventist community worked to secure non-combatant status for its members during the Civil War. Andrews expanded on his initial writings, linking religious freedom to what today we would call human rights. In the 1880s, Adventists began a decades-long effort to oppose various initiatives by organizations such as the National Reform Association to pass religious legislation in the United States. The church focused much of its efforts on protesting state Sunday laws and resisting proposals to introduce a national Sunday law. During this time, some Adventist church members were prosecuted for violating state-mandated Sunday observance. And as their advocacy in the religious life of its citizens, they saw themselves as defending the legacy of the founders of America. It is around this time that a central figure in the early Adventist church wrote, somehow my PowerPoint has disappeared. We are not doing the will of God if we sit in quietude, doing nothing. Let us be more earnest in prayer, and then let us work in harmony with our prayers. And working in harmony with our prayers meant in 1886, the Seventh-day Adventist Church started publishing a magazine called The Sentinel. It was focused on religious liberty. In 1887, it set up a committee on religious liberty. However, it recognized that this was not enough. It needed a formal organization to respond more specifically to increasing challenges. And in 1889, during a meeting in Battle Creek, Adventist leaders established a new association with 110 members to promote and defend religion. The new organization was called National Religious Liberty Association. But this created a lot of interest outside North America, as just a small church at this stage. But it's significant that just 4 years later, in 1893, it was renamed the International Religious Liberty Association. It had 6 offices in North America and 4 outside, London, Melbourne, and significant for us here today, Cape Town and Toronto. But perhaps the clearest connection of the Seventh-day Adventist Church with religious liberty is seen through the writings of one of its pioneers, Ellen White. She lived mainly in the 19th century, and yet her writings still impact the church today. The period between 1860 and the start of the 1900s, when she traveled and wrote and spoke, was transformative for religious freedom in the United States. As indicated earlier, it started with tensions between northern free states and southern states where slavery was still practiced. The result was a civil war where both sides felt that right was on their side. And as the country grappled with its identity post-Civil War, the role of religion, civil rights for all, and an emerging women's rights movement which vocally supported temperance and social reform. And these were the issues that Seventh-day Adventist members had to grapple with on a day-to-day basis and develop a faith-based response. Against this background, we find some very significant statements that helped shape the Seventh-day Adventist Church's attitude and thinking regarding religious liberty and freedom of conscience. White begins by painting a big picture. Freedom of conscience is a God-given right. She identified freedom of choice and conscience as the issue in the cosmic conflict between God and Satan. On earth, this is seen as a constant battle between good and evil, and according to Ellen White, God is good. God is love. And as a loving God, he created humans with freedom of choice. In Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve were presented with that choice, and they chose not to believe in God. And White frames the ongoing battle for the human conscience as follows. God never forces the will or the conscience, but Satan's constant resort to gain control of those who he cannot otherwise seduce is compulsion by cruelty. Through fear or force, he endeavors to rule the conscience. She understood and articulated that each person had a God-given right to make their own decisions. They should never relinquish their individuality, sublimate their will to that of another human being, or give their decision-making ability to another person. It is not God's purpose that any human being should yield his mind to the will to the control of another, becoming a passive instrument in his hands. No one is to merge his individuality with that of another. He is not to look to any human being as a source of healing. His dependence must be in God, in the dignity of his God-given manhood. He is to be controlled by God himself, not by any human intelligence. God created humans with a mind to reason and to think. And that gift should not be surrendered to anyone. The guiding control should not be another human, but God. For her, when people feel they know best, they are on dangerous ground. Quite simply, she recognized everyone makes mistakes. No one is infallible. And when an individual tries to control the thoughts and actions of others, they are likely to make mistakes, which will have negative consequences both for themselves and for others. But this was not just theory. She applied it in practice, and in 1900 she wrote a letter to John Harvey Kellogg. At this time he was running a sanitarium in Battle Creek, and she, along with others, had counseled him not to make certain business arrangements. He ignored the advice and continued along the route he wanted to go. At the time, she was in Australia, and she wrote a long letter to him. She had known Kellogg since he was a young man. She was a mother figure. She had nurtured him. She made some very pointed comments, leaving no room for doubt. Religious liberty, let me see. There we go. Religious liberty is to be freely exercised. You are not to confederate together, agreeing that you will or will not do certain things. No man is to think that he is the owner, liable to make mistakes, as every man is. He must not try to control matters in accordance with his ideas. For her, the idea of trying to force or bend someone's will was unacceptable because it went against the very foundation of who God is. The exercise of force is contrary to the principles of God's government. He desires only the service of love, and love cannot be commanded. It cannot be won by force or authority. Only by love is love awakened. These kinds of statements and actions, combined with external circumstances such as proposed Sunday laws, gave rise to the birth of IRLA. The emphasis on freedom of conscience also had another outcome, a practical outcome, the setting up of orphanages that took in children regardless of their background in America, and again, relevant for us in Cape Town. Each person is created in the image of God, and yet each is unique. From our fingerprints to the way we think, the way we reason. Although we may agree on a point, sit down and talk, and we will find different approaches. We will find different nuances and understanding, and White recognized this and saw in this God's creative power, and in this a clear indication of God's intention that each person had freedom of choice. Not all minds are constituted alike, and we may thank God that this is the case. Each person is at liberty to freely state his convictions, and there is to be no lording it over in the children of God. No man is to take another man's mind and mold it over to meet his mind and ideas, for the molding might be for the worst, not the better. In other words, no human being should be another's conscience or decision makers. White was very, very clear that God was a loving God who created humanity with the ability to think, reason, and choose. For her, God's governance and law is a law of love. And when humanity's decisions are informed by this love, then each person will be given the possibility of using their freedom to choose not only what is good for themselves, but also to allow others the same freedom. By her death in 1915, the belief that freedom of conscience had become part of the DNA of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and these ideas have shaped our engagement with religious liberty and freedom of conscience. The religious liberty work in Africa, as we saw, has been growing alongside the IRLA since its inception 131 years ago. And it's wonderful to see how from this small beginning, the work of religious liberty has promoted chapters in different countries and areas of the continent. And that has now blossomed to where we are today with the launch of a new organization, AARLA, an organization which has taken time to develop, but it is one that links the whole continent of Africa. It is supporting the common goals of freedom of conscience, religious liberty for all in an African context. This new organization opens us to welcoming other faiths and those of none who want to partner with AARLA in promoting religious liberty and freedom of conscience. As we go along this afternoon, we will actually acknowledge and form the organization, but I do need to acknowledge the work of the chairman, Dr. Blasius Ruguri, and Dr. Joel Akindo, and the wise counsel and encouragement that has brought us to this point today of Dr. Ganoon Diop. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, through PAL and through IRLA, will continue to join hands with AARLA, working with it, supporting this organization as it continues to bring together people, no matter what their religion or their background, to promote freedom of conscience and religious liberty, including the right to believe or not to believe, and to live this out in their daily lives.
Asante sana. Okay, I teach some classes at Andrews University still, and I think it probably would be good if we all just stood up for 2 seconds. Can everybody stand up? I noticed that after lunch, you know, it's so easy to begin to feel a little bit, thank you. All right, I will try to be quick. When Dr. Diop spoke on Tuesday, he said he was grateful, and he gave some background. I'll go ahead and start, and you stretch and be standing as much as you want. He gave some background about his ongoing recovery from a health crisis, and it prompted me to consider some of the many things that I'm grateful for. Among them, I'm grateful that we have come together here to discuss this issue of importance to all humanity. There are places where we couldn't have done so. I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet each of you, and I'm always grateful to enjoy the warm welcome of Africa. So I thank you for all of that. Yes, let's clap. The warm welcome. The warm welcome of Africa is something unique in the world, and I always appreciate it. Vice President Audrey Anderson has already spoken about the relationship of the Adventist Church and the All Africa Religious Freedom Association, and as she noted, we warmly support its work. It was suggested that I speak about the relationship between the IRLA, the International Religious Freedom Association, an interfaith organization, and the All Africa Religious Freedom Organization. I've worked with IRLA and Dr. Ganoun Diop since 2017, and up until now, the AARLA, the All Africa Religious Liberty Association, has not been a formal organization, but our African brothers and sisters here have operated as a chapter of the IRLA. The AARLA is now taking wing as a formal, independent, interfaith organization. IRLA and AARLA will operate as friends, as brothers and sisters, as two separate organizations, each working toward the same goal, consulting as they find it useful, and we're available to help when we can. But we appreciate the initiative, and I think this can be a benefit for all of Africa. But I'm not going to sit down until I've talked a little bit about what we have seen this week. I think somebody was wanting to think about takeaways. Let's remember some of these outstanding presentations. I think we all agree with Dr. Diop's observations that freedom of conscience is necessary. It's fundamental to what it means to be a human being. As we discussed the goal of reducing conflict, I got to thinking how reducing conflict really helps us progress toward the goal of freedom of conscience for all. At the same time, protecting freedom of conscience for all helps us progress toward the reduction of conflict. They are mutually reinforcing. I think it was Ambassador Tom Amolo who said here that wherever there is democratic backsliding, however, minority religions suffer, and we have to watch out for that. I also was moved by the presentation of our brother from Religions for Peace. As AARLA and IRLA consider future issues, we should keep his words in mind. I think we are all believers in God here. I'm an outsider, and I come here with a different background, but we share similar goals. I recognize that, but I want to take advantage of the opportunity to make a few observations. As we head home, we mustn't just wrap up and be complacent. We have to keep in mind that as far as the outside world is concerned, an international group of us have talked and agreed to work on this issue. But we're not done yet. We haven't done anything but talked. We all feel good about ourselves and our commitment to this human right, correct? But if we only talk, or if we mainly support religious liberty for ourselves, then Abraham Lincoln's phrase comes to mind, "The world will little note nor long remember what we say here." Before we go, I want to prick the consciences of each of us a little bit, Christians and Muslims, Hindus and Buddhists alike. My Catholic and Protestant friends, my Methodist, Lutheran, Evangelical, and Mormon friends, my Shiite, Sunni, or Ahmadiyya and Sufi friends, But if I say something that makes you just a tiny bit uncomfortable, please forgive me and consider it in the context of our shared goals. I have to mention I'm going to pick out one particular presentation title that struck me. The presenter who used the title, Religious Liberty for Me and Sometimes for You. Think about that title carefully. Religious liberty for me and sometimes for you. Is it possible that it's an unspoken approach by all of us, even if it's not fully considered? Let's just be honest and remember that if that phrase might be accurate, even deep in our hearts, that we care more about religious freedom for us and our group than for other groups, then we fall short of really supporting true religious liberty. We all say that we support Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we include freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and the freedom to change religion. In a recent discussion, it was that we may believe good and right and worthy things, but we usually stick with our group first. The same is true for religious liberty, I fear. We each know our own group best. My group is not anti-Catholic, but sadly, in their zealotry, a few may have left that impression. My church is not anti-Muslim, but again, sadly, there may be a few members who, in their zealotry, have left that impression. We all need to work on recognizing that other people of other groups are God's children every bit as much as we are. We need to say no to religious intolerance, and I suggest we need more than just religious tolerance. It worries me when I hear someone say, "We have the truth." Think how that sounds. I realize it's a sort of a shorthand statement, but it also implies that we small humans know more about God than we really know. And if we don't know everything about God, then how do we know that we have the truth? Maybe our group has some truth, and another group has some truth, and a third group has some truth. And we just don't know it yet and won't until God chooses to reveal it to us. So I ask my fellow Seventh-day Adventist fellow believers, do Seventh-day Adventists truly believe in religious liberty for all? I hope so. Do my Catholic fellow believers truly believe in religious liberty for all? I hope so. What about my Baptist fellow believers? anti-Catholic, or all? I hope so. What about my Baptist fellow believers?